Well, today we are going to be talking about ministry events. And I feel like that's a timely subject. It kind of felt the direction I was feeling pulled in as my team and I were discussing putting this training on. And so we're going to be talking about ministry events. And we do have 2 hours. So we're going to have some time to really explore how to create ministry events that are going to help you grow your ministry and to maybe find ways that are even more effective than you're using now. And the first thing that we're going to begin with is to understand how Jesus grew his following, because not only is it scripture, but Jesus was exceptionally gifted at influencing people. And when we look at the Bible, we just see thousands of people following him through the wilderness. They follow him, through the desert. And I think in modern times, especially Kate, especially in Western countries. So I don't know that I can speak exactly to I think you said you're in Bulgaria. I don't know if I can speak exactly to that. So you're welcome to, fill in the blanks. But at least in the West, pastors and ministry leaders have a very difficult time getting people to come into the church. So just to get out of bed on a Sunday and to go into church is a struggle. And Jesus has people following him from all over the place, from outside the country in Israel, we see in a number of verses. So to begin, I want to go over the five steps that Jesus uses and in his ministry to grow his audience. And so we're going to
Just
do
to
that.
mention something, yes, that's really a big of an issue, um, all over the world, but especially here in my country. This is just not a thing. People going to church, people following the traditions,
Mhm.
the the Bible, the just people here have long forgotten how to live the way the Bible says.
Mm.
And this is really a big of an issue, a big problem here in my country. Um, Maybe in most of Europe, that's just a tendency that is going not in a good direction, and it will be really amazing if we can do something to change this. Just
I agree.
yeah,
That's great.
this is the situation. This is the reality here, especially here in most of Europe, but here even more. Just
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. See, I was unaware of that because I know a lot of Europe now is just like, America is now considered a non-Christian country, which is crazy enough. But I know Europe's, 10 years ahead of that curve. And there's a lot of very dark places in Europe in regard to Christianity. But from what I hear you saying, Bulgaria is even has moved away from Christianity even more. And I think this is kind of what we're going to be getting into today.
Yes, that,
Sure.
that that is very true. Maybe there are a few countries in Europe which are a little bit closer to the church,
Yeah.
to God,
Excellent.
to traditions, to everything, but there are very few. Maybe Greece, maybe Malta.
Yeah.
Malta, by the way, is my favorite country because of that.
Yep.
There, just everything is felt so amazing that they're just the best country in Europe. There, the presence of God, the presence of Christ, the presence of um, just that spirit of love for the church, for the traditions, for just, even the people are different there because
Hmm.
of that, because they follow. But uh, maybe in some other southern countries like Spain, Italy, maybe they're also getting further from the church, but
Yeah.
there are still a few places, but most of Europe, here, especially in the northern places, this is just not a thing, and it's not, it's very sad.
Yes, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And yeah, so where we're going to come around to today is how to grow the church. And so that's what we're going to be trying to understand as we kind of finish the lesson today. But yeah, so continuing. So Jesus did 5 steps in his ministry. You can read the New Testament, you can see it in quite a number of places. And so the first thing that Jesus does is he goes to his audience. And Sophie, I am aware that you've heard this before. So we are going to be coming around to some stuff you probably haven't heard quite as much. So anyway, but we'll go ahead and do these five steps real briefly. I'm not going to go into these, Kate, as much as I typically would, only because I've got tons of this on our YouTube channel. This is a pretty standard kind of lesson, but we are going to review it here. So the first thing Jesus does is he knows who his audience is. So of the first five steps here, he knows who his audience is. And as an example of this, he says, I come for my lost sheep of Israel. So, is Jesus interested in saving all of humanity? Yes, but he's also interested in specifically coming to share that, he's the Messiah to the Jews, God's chosen people. And Christ knows that people like Paul are going to go to the Roman, the Gentiles. There are going to be other people who share the gospel around the world, but Christ's focus specifically on the Jews. And we also know that he knows his audience in verses like when he goes out to Peter, James, and John on the boats. And Peter, James, and John are fishing, and Jesus is standing on the hill, and he is looking at these fishermen, right? It says he goes to Gennesaret, and he sees these 3 fishermen, and they're washing their nets. They're washing their nets, and it's morning, and there's no fish in the boats. So he understands that these are fishermen with no fish. And that is a fairly profound thing to understand about something. That would be like being a pastor with no congregation. That would be like, being a marketer with no clients to market. Like that's their job. And so they do not have a means by which then to provide for their families. And I've been to Israel, and I've been to a town on the Sea of Galilee called Magdala, where they would likely have sold their fish. There are these really neat bowls they're like rocks, and they've got these big bowls carved into them. Oops. And that's where they would have put the fish as the Roman soldiers walked through, or other townspeople, and they would have bought the fish out of these bowls. Well, they don't have any to sell to their family. So Jesus knows who these men are. They are in a tight spot. So that's step 1. He knows who they are. And step 2 is he goes to them. So it says that Jesus goes to Gennesaret. And it doesn't just say that he stopped there. It said he went to the edge of the lake while he's talking to the crowds. And then he walks himself right into their boats, right into their boat. And he says, push off to the shore. And then he continues speaking to the crowd. So he does not just wait around. He's not in the synagogue, or, what we'd call a church today. He's not in the temple. He's going to his audience. And we see this confirmed in a number of places as well. For example, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He is going all the time, and he's walking on foot and traveling around, and he's going to the lost sheep of Israel that God has called him to. So he knows who his audience is, and he is going to the people that God called him to. And then step 3 is he's meeting I would say in marketing, what we would call a deeply felt need, a profound need that his audience knows they have. So in the case of Peter, James, and John, they're fishermen with no fish. And that's a serious need. And so he meets what I would call a terrestrial in Latin. That would terra would be earth. So, and I'm separating that from worldly need, because a lot of times in the church we'll say worldly, but we're talking about sin. I'm not saying he's granting sinful desires, but he's meeting an earthly need or a terrestrial need, like you just need food. So in this case, fishermen need fish. And so he's meeting this deeply felt sort of terrestrial need. And in the case he does this all over the New Testament. He gives blind people sight and the lame people the ability to walk, and he gives lepers health, and he gives thousands of hungry people food. And so one of the things that I think is really profound about this, and I think we miss in the church a lot, is Jesus isn't just doing any old good thing. He is consistently meeting the most impactful terrestrial need that they have. So as an example, Jesus looks at the blind man and he says, well, what do you want from me? And the blind man goes, well, I'm blind. I want to be able to see. And so Jesus prays and he says, be healed. And the blind man opens his eyes and he still can't see. And Jesus is like, how do you feel? And the blind man's like, well, I'm still blind. And Jesus is like, well, how about that lower back pain? Didn't you have some lower back pain? And the blind man's like, well, yeah, I guess that's gone. And he goes, there you go. You got your miracle. And the blind man walks away. How does the blind man walk away in that scenario? And that's not a biblical story, just so you know. That is an example of what we often do in the church. The blind man got a miracle from God through Jesus, and he still would walk away disappointed because it was not the most deeply felt need. Jesus didn't heal back pain for blind people. He healed blindness for blind people. So when Jesus met a need, he met the right need. And a lot of times in churches and in Christian ministries, we do a good thing, but people are still walking away disappointed because we're not meeting the terrestrial need that is most important to them. And that's what they thought we were promising when they come to church or when they go to ministries and things like this. So Jesus knows who his audience is. He's going to them. He meets a deeply felt need. Now, this is the interesting thing. Once he meets the need, he shifts the conversation to the spiritual need. And so, for example, when he goes out to Peter, James, and John, and he goes out to them on the boats and he meets their need for fish, they are like, oh my gosh, this guy is miraculous. And he says, I will make you fishers of men. He says, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. So he went from providing fishermen fish, which is something that they understand the value of. They know the value of fish. They have to sell fish to feed their families and pay their bills and do all the things. And he gives them 2 boatloads of fish, so much so that the boats are sinking. That's a lot of fish. Well, it says that he then said, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. So we went from the terrestrial or the earthly need that they knew they had, and then he ties that in to a spiritual need that they're not quite aware of probably not quite aware of what he means. But the profound thing is that they believe him so much. And I mean, obviously, he just met their need in a powerful way. He met their need so much that they left all the fish. It says they left everything. He just gave them a small fortune in fish. It says they were shocked at the amount of fish, and they just left them all when he said, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. So what he did in this, and I'm going to give a couple more examples of this, but what he did in this scenario is he met the earthly need. And because they understood the value of the earthly need, it allowed him to transition to a spiritual need that they weren't fully aware of that they had, which was to be fishers of men in this case. Now, let's look at another one. The Samaritan woman. He goes to the Samaritan woman and he's talking to her about physical water, right? Which is also a terrestrial need. We don't drink water, we die. So he's talking to her about a need. And she's here in the middle of the day. It's hot. There's a number of reasons why she's there in the middle of the day, but one of them that is pointed out is that the other women basically don't want to walk with her because she's got 4 husbands. So she's living a little bit of a crazy life. And so he's talking to her about the necessity of water in the heat of the day. And so they're talking about water. And he said, well, if you knew who you were talking to, you would ask me for water, and I would give you living water that never runs dry. And she does not know. So you'll notice there's the shift again. We're talking about the worldly, that again has a sinful connotation, the earth, the terrestrial need of water. And he's talking about meeting this need. And then he shifts to the spiritual, which is the living water. And she doesn't know what he's talking about. She does not understand the analogy. And frankly, the reason why he uses an analogy is most likely because she wouldn't understand the actual concept of life, in the spirit, life in Christ, life, spiritual life. So she says, well, where is this living water and how do I get it? And how are you going to get it? Like, you don't have a bucket, you don't have a rope. So she doesn't understand the shift that he made, but she ultimately comes around to understanding that he is the Messiah as he continues the conversation. So again, we see this shift from the need she understands for water to the need she doesn't understand, which is for living water in this case. And this happens directly after this as well. When the disciples come back and they say, Master, we have food. And he says, I have food you know nothing about. And they look at each other and, they're like, where's he hiding the food? Does he got a sandwich in his pocket or something? And what does he says? He says my food is to do the will of the Father, or something like that. And so again, initially they don't understand what he's talking about with food, because he took a physical terrestrial earth need and turned it into a spiritual idea, and then had to sort of explain it to them. But it's at least understandable, because what people know is they know the terrestrial or earthly needs that they have. Everybody knows they need water. Everybody knows they need food. Everybody knows that they need relationships and these types of things. But, it's relatively evident that not everybody knows they need Jesus. That's not obvious. And so people will come to get their needs met, their terrestrial needs, but they may not have any idea that they need Christ. And so Jesus, knowing this, meets the terrestrial, the physical, earthly need first. And when they understand that he cares about them and he's moving in their best interest and acting in their best interest, then he takes control of the conversation and shifts it over. So that's the 4th step in his 5-step ministry growth strategy, I guess is what we're calling it. And so he knows who his audience is. He goes to where they're at, and he goes like right up to them. He meets a deeply felt need. And once he meets the need, then he shifts the conversation to the spiritual. And step 5, and this is a marketing term that I'm going to use, and this is called a call to action. He calls them to action. And a call to action is a very clear statement, calling the audience, like, he knew his audience. He went to Peter, James, and John, and he called them. And the answer is a very clear yes or no. And he said, follow me. That's the call to action. And this is what you get. I'll make you fishers of men. But the follow me is the call to action. And they can say yes or they can say no. And Jesus seems to allow people 100% freedom to make that choice. Yes, we're going to follow you. And they left everything and they followed him. I was just reading in Luke. Actually, I'm not sure if I have this. Oh, I might have this pulled up right now, actually. Hold on. I was just reading in Luke where a couple of different instances of this happen. And I don't know that one to just quote it off the top of my head. Let's see. We're actually making pretty good time here, so I might be able to find that. There it is. So you got a couple different people here. The cost of following Christ. one man says, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus says, well, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He's saying you have to be willing to give up a place, I don't know, that you might call home to follow me here. Let the dead bury their own dead. This is the next man who says, Lord, but let me bury my father first. He says, let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and proclaim the kingdom. So here he's saying maybe something akin to people or family or worldly affairs. You have to let that go to follow me. And the last one is, he says, let me go back and say goodbye to my family. This is, by the way, I'm sorry, this is in Luke 9:57 to 62. But he says, let me go back and say goodbye to my family. He says, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. So if you want to begin serving in the kingdom of God and following me, don't look back, because we're going this way. And so when Jesus calls people to action, he is giving a clear yes or no option. The rich young ruler is another example of this. He says, oh, I've already followed the law. I've already followed the prophets. I'm a righteous man. What else do I need to do to inherit the kingdom of God? And he goes, well, okay, you're a really rich guy, and that's obviously a thing for you. Go and give all your possessions to the poor and then come and follow me. And he went away sad. Why? Because he gave him a clear call to action. Give away all your stuff, then follow me. And he was not willing, presumably, to take that. And it said he went away sad. So the fifth step in Jesus's ministry growth strategy is to call people to action. And I have two verses to really kind of pull this together here that are just so powerful. Let's see here. There we go. And I've got those right here. Okay. Okay. So this is Matthew 4:23 through 25. I've been thinking and considering how Jesus got so many people to follow him so that he could share the good news with them. And I've been thinking about this for years. And the biggest question I've always had is it really true that Jesus meeting needs is what got people to follow him? So I've got two passages we're going to look at, and then we're going to move on to sort of the next section of our training. So in Matthew 4:23 through 25, it says, and he, which is Jesus, he went through all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. And so his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pains and oppressed by demons, and those having seizures and paralytics, and he healed them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee and Decapolis, and from Jerusalem and Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. And now I'd read this like 100 times. And as I was trying to answer this question, why are people following Jesus? This became one, I would say, of the two most powerful sort of ministry growth Bible verses that I've ever come across. And so it says in verse 23 of Matthew 4, he went throughout Galilee. Okay, so Galilee is the northern part of Israel. So this is a relatively small region. It's a Jewish region, and he was teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and affliction among people. So he's doing two things. He's teaching and preaching, and he's healing, which the way in which we're discussing this is he's meeting deeply felt needs. If he's healing people who are sick and demon possessed, and what does it say? They've got seizures and they're paralyzed. That would be meeting deeply felt needs. So he's teaching and he's preaching and he's healing diseases. So he's meeting needs. My question was, but why are they following him? Are they following him for the teaching and the preaching, or are they following him for the meeting of the needs? And so after it says he's doing those things, it says his fame spread throughout all Syria. Okay, so I think the first thing is, how does his fame spread throughout Syria? It's not like a Facebook post goes viral or an Instagram, or Twitter. Like, it's not how this works. People walked across the Syrian desert and made him famous with their feet. So that's pretty significant. So this is not like people are just getting out of bed on a Sunday morning and like, yeah, I'll drive 5 minutes to church. They're walking across the desert to tell their friends what is going on. So this is profound, but what is it that's driving these people to go and talk about Jesus? Okay, so he's teaching and he's preaching, and the fame spreads to him. That's 24, verse 24a, the beginning of 24. And then it says in 24b, the end of verse 24, they brought to him all who were sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pains, and those oppressed by demons, those having seizures and paralytics, and he healed them. So of the teaching and the preaching, who came to listen? Was it the super educated and the scribes, and they're like, this guy has brilliant teaching? Or was it sick people who had terrestrial needs and needed healing? And it's obviously the sick people. It's, he says, I have not come for the healthy. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick, in other passages. So he is teaching and preaching, which is good. He is growing his following by meeting the needs of the people. And so because of the meeting of the needs, his fame spreads all through Syria, and they bring him all of these people with illnesses. It says various diseases and pains, those oppressed by demon, those having seizures, paralytics, and then he healed them. So he's teaching and preaching and healing. So he heals those people, and because they're healed, they go walk themselves all over Syria, which seems like a good reason to go run around and tell everybody, like, look, I'm healthy again. And then those people, presumably that he healed, or the people that saw him do the first round of healing, went and got everybody from Syria. They walked themselves across the desert, grabbed their friends, brought them back to Jesus. They're like, you got to walk across this desert with me because you got to see this guy. And then all of those sick people, it says, and he healed them at the end of verse 24. And then what happens? And great crowds followed him from Galilee and Decapolis and from Jerusalem and Judea and from beyond the Jordan. So somehow we went from spread throughout all Syria to spread throughout all of these other areas too. So these people are going and getting more people. So as Jesus meets deeply felt needs of the people in his life, or excuse me, in and around his ministry, they then go out and get more people and bring them. And then you have great crowds following Jesus through the wilderness. So as he meets needs, his ministry grows. And we're going to end on this verse. This is No, that's not Romans. What is this? John 6:26 through 28. Okay, so that sort of starts to answer my question. Why are people following Jesus? That seems like pretty solid material right there. Then later I discovered this verse. Jesus answered, very truly I tell you, he's talking to the crowds. You are looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. So this is, I believe he is talking to the crowds that were the feeding of the 4,000 or the feeding of the 5,000. I believe this is the same crowd. Either way, he said, you're not he says, you're looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed. So they're not even here following Jesus because of the miracles he performed. In this case, he says, it's because you ate the loaves and had your fill. And my question first was that like metaphorical, or is he actually just talking about bread? So he says, do not work for food that spoils, but that's literal food. Don't work for bread. And so notice he's talking about, but he's doing it again. He's talking about the terrestrial need, food that spoils. Don't work for that. Shifting it to the spiritual, he says, do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life. So now he's talking about eternal food, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him, God the Father has placed his seal of approval. So this is a direct confirmation from Jesus that people are following him because he met their needs, specifically in this case, need for food. Okay, so Jesus is going through 5 steps to grow his ministry. And I think this is very strategic. I do not think this is chance. I think Jesus is well aware of the fact that when he meets needs, people come to him. So he knows his audience. He goes to where they're at. He meets a deeply felt need. He changes the conversation from the need that he met, the terrestrial need for food or water or whatever it is. He shifts that to the spiritual, and then he calls them to action. And when I look, and I'm speaking broadly, I'm not making all-encompassing claims because this isn't true for every ministry, but when I look at the Christian church in the West, what I see is that we don't know who our audience is. Paul says, I was sent to the Gentiles. Jesus said, I was sent to the lost sheep of Israel. Peter says he was sent to the circumcised, which would be the Jews. They know who they're talking to. When I talk with ministry leaders, and I talk with ministry leaders all over the world, when I talk with them, they say, we're talking to everybody. Jesus doesn't talk to everybody. Paul doesn't talk to everybody. Peter doesn't talk to everybody. The remaining disciples that stayed in Jerusalem don't talk to everybody. The books of the Bible themselves, the New Testament books like Galatians, was not written to everybody. It was written to the church at Galatia. So what I see in the New Testament is that there is very specific target audience, just like we do in marketing. And when I talk to ministry leaders, we think we're talking to everyone. And if I'm talking to everyone, this would be akin to, like, obviously you're not actually talking to everyone. I'm not talking to people in China right now. I'm talking to Kate and Sophie, which would be Scotland and Bulgaria. So I'm not talking to people in China. So I'm not talking to everyone, but if I think I'm talking to everyone, then my message is going to be very unclear. An example of this would be, like, for example, Christmas is coming around, which is why we're going to be talking about events today. And I'll show you how we're pulling this into events. If I'm talking...
There was a saying that when you talk to everybody, you talk to nobody. That's just, we need to, yeah, that's amazing. We need to know our audience.
Yes.
And how to structure our message so
yes,
to reach the right people in the right way.
Yes, no, absolutely. You're right. And as an example of that, Kate, my wife, Christmas is coming around. If I'm going to buy her a gift, I'm not going to go look up a blog. I mean, can you imagine if I just said on the internet, best gifts for women, and then I went on a blog that's like 105 best gifts for women, and it's just talking about any woman. This could be your niece or your nephew or your grandma or just some random person you don't know, your sister-in-law, your wife. It's just a bunch of random gifts. And I just scroll through there and I'm like, well, I'm just talking to everybody. And I just grab one and I order that off Amazon and it shows up and I give that to my wife for Christmas. That is not going to be meaningful, and she's not going to be happy about it because I'm talking to everyone. I'm talking to any woman, not my wife. Well, I actually know my wife, and she has particular tastes and things that are different than every woman, whatever that means. So in order to speak meaningfully to our audience, we have to speak to our individual audience, the audience God has called us specifically to. And there's some strategy in that. There are a number of ways that we can determine that, and that's maybe for a different call. But the first thing is, in the church, broadly speaking, we really don't know who we're talking to anymore. We don't understand that we're talking to a very narrow group. What a lot of ministry leaders tell me as well, how beautiful are the feet that spread the good news, and the Great Commission, go unto the whole world. And that's why they believe that we're talking to everybody. Yeah, the whole church talks to everybody. Your church, your ministry talks to a very specific group of people. The example I use a lot is, inner city working single mothers. You can know a lot about how to make a difference and meet needs when you're talking to inner city working single mothers. They're broke, they're exhausted, they don't have time with their kids, and they're probably very lonely because, they don't have a husband or, someone to share life with. And they probably don't have a lot of community either. So we can really target in and focus on blessing their lives. But if I'm just talking to anyone, well, I probably just end up with a church with 2 Bible studies, one for men and one for women, and a Sunday service. And, that's all right, but it's also limited in its impact. So, firstly, we don't know who we're talking to, broadly speaking. Next, we don't really go to them anymore. This was more common in the past, but today, what do? We sit in church and we expect people to come to church. And that's why these meetings and, my email systems are just having a difficult time. But we've had hundreds and hundreds of people sign up for these calls in the last couple of months. And that's why, because we want church growth. Well, the problem is that the church isn't supposed to grow in the building. You go out to where they're at. That's where the church grows. And that's what we see Jesus doing. He's just always out where they're at. So we don't know who we're talking to. We don't go out to them. And then we also, and this isn't always true. There are some very successful Christian denominations that are very good at meeting needs. But a lot of small churches are just focusing in on the spiritual needs. Well, if I were to ask them, what's the need you meet? They'd say, well, we meet the spiritual needs. We share the gospel and we help them get a relationship with Jesus. Well, that's great for people who know they need that. Like you're basically just targeting Christians, because every non-Christian person in your community has no idea they need that. So they're never going to come. And so what terrestrial or what non-spiritual need are you meeting? Are you meeting the needs of food? Are you helping these inner city single working mother? Like, what need do you meet that is going to attract people to you like they do for Christ? Okay, well, a lot of ministries don't really know what that is. So many churches are not meeting a deeply felt need. And because they're going to the 4th step, shift the conversation from the need you meet to the spiritual, so then they can grasp that transition. Well, we don't do that because we just start with the spiritual. The only needs we meet are the spiritual needs, which is why people are checked out. So we don't do that at all. And do we do calls to action? And this gets a little bit more technical because in marketing, calls to action are very important. Do we do calls to action? Yes and no. Some churches do none, and they just assume people. This is in the minority of ministries, but they'll do none, and they just assume people know what to do. And that's a mistake because people don't know what to do, and people they're not going to put the effort in to figure it out. The alternative is, and this is much more common, we have 35 calls to action. It's like, come to men's breakfast, come to women's breakfast, come to Sunday service, join live online, download the bulletin, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube. And we give them like 100 things to do. Well, that's akin to Jesus saying, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men, and subscribe and do all this stuff. And he didn't do that. He just said, follow me. And the answer is yes or no. So people cannot follow if they're not clear on how to follow. And we really struggle with that in the church. So those are the 5 steps to ministry growth that I believe Jesus lays out in the New Testament and that he lives out, and based on that goes to create the largest movement that the world's ever seen. So if we can do those 5 things, but with an emphasis on the meeting needs, I think you can mess a lot of stuff up. But if you meet people's most deeply felt needs, the needs they understand that they have, then you're going to see growth. And so maybe we can pause there for just a couple minutes. Now, I did prepare quite a bit of material for today, and I still have some to get through. But Kate, any thoughts on what we're discussing so far?
Well, I completely agree with everything. Uh, mm, Especially on the part where we really need to know who we are talking to,
Mm,
who we are sharing our message with. Because if we share it with the wrong audience, um, it will just devaluate our message.
yeah.
We need to know uh, to whom we are sharing our message and in what way, and timing is also very, very important. Just all that symbiosis between our calling, our beliefs, and modern day methods like marketing and all these modern ways of reaching out to people is
Mm,
just amazing. Something um, we don't really think about.
yeah.
We it's not something new, obviously, but it's something we don't think about, and we really need to think about it. We
Yeah.
need to implement it in order to reach the people who need it with the right message, with the right tools, and to achieve some results,
That's great.
which is really important, but surprisingly too hard to achieve.
Yeah, it is.
But it's really amazing. Yeah.
It's very difficult. Well, good. Okay. Well, thank you so much. So, um, now I think the next question is, how does this really have anything to do with events? And I want to bring this around to events. And I want to give an analogy here. It's because we're coming up on Christmas. And if you're watching this online and you're not in this call, this is kind of what we're bringing this into, is how do we grow our ministries during Christmas? And I think we have to ground it in that sort of first understanding of how did Jesus grow his ministry? Well, he met needs that are not spiritual needs. He started with terrestrial, earthly needs. Okay, so let's say that I have kids, and I have two kids. Let's say my wife and I are downstairs in the living room in the evenings, and we're spending time together in the evenings, and our kids are upstairs. They're in their rooms, and we want them to come downstairs and spend time with us, but they don't come down. And we don't know why they're not coming downstairs to spend time with us. Well, so we start trying things, we start experimenting, we start saying, okay, well, what can we do to get them to come down and to participate in community and to participate in the family and to build relationships and to bless each other and all of these things, even to come downstairs so we can read the Bible as a family. Well, let's say we start texting them, hey, we'd love to have you come on down, and they don't come down, and we start in emails, we email them, hey, come downstairs, we want you to come for family time, and they're not coming down. Well, come around to the holidays, family starts coming over, we've got presents under the tree, there's lots of delicious food, families bringing over potluck style, lots of food, there's music, there's Christmas music on, and it's a whole event. And lo and behold, the kids come downstairs and they hang out and they have a lot of fun, and it's like, oh, this is so refreshing, this is how it's supposed to be. It's the whole family's here, and this is what my wife and I are thinking, the whole family's here, this is what it's supposed to be like all the time. And we think to ourselves, what is it that got the kids to come downstairs? Well, it's the event. It's the event. And what we need to do to solve the problem is we need more events. We need more events, and we need bigger events. So, come Easter, come next year on Christmas, New Year's, in the US, Halloween, trunk or treat is what they call it at a lot of Protestant churches in the US. We're going to find every reason to have an event because obviously the kids come downstairs when there's events. And so what do my wife and I do following this reasoning? Well,
It's like a way to connect with the audience if we need to translate it into
I'm sorry.
marketing terms. It's just a way to connect with our audience,
Mhm.
translate it into marketing terms.
Yes. And so what we do is my wife and I in this example is we start having more presence, bigger events, louder music, more food. And that is the state of the church, at least in, again, I'm speaking generally, it's not the state of every church, but broadly in the West, that is our strategy for connecting with our audience. Now, I don't necessarily think that's all bad. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a Christmas event and having family over and food and gifts and all this stuff. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I do think that it is fairly obvious when we break this analogy down to the most basic family unit that if this is happening in a family, there's a deeper problem at play. There is something happening that is the reason the kids don't want to come downstairs. Something's happening or something's not happening. Now, I think the most easy thing to say is that there is a need that the kids want met that they can meet by themselves in their rooms that we're not meeting downstairs. And if we were to start meeting that need downstairs, then they would just come downstairs because everybody wants to be in relationship. Everybody wants to be in community. But if it's harder than it has to be, they'll just go it alone, sort of thing. So something's happening that's the actual root of the issue. Everybody loves a good party. Everybody will show up for a bunch of food and loud music and presents. But why won't they show up the rest of the time? And this is very common. We have in the US, we have what a lot of ministry leaders will call CEO Christians or Christmas and Easter only Christians. And they only come on Christmas and they only come on Easter. And the goal is to, like, I don't know, convince them that they should go to church outside of Christmas and Easter. And so we've really got to make sure we have a super duper powerful sermon during the holidays.
That's also a really big issue. I see it since forever, to be honest.
Yeah.
People remember about the church only on Christmas and
Yep.
Easter, and that is all.
Yeah.
And also maybe when they're getting married, but that's
Yeah.
very
You're
small.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we remember the church and we remember God in these big events, but we, people are sort of forgetting the rest of the year. And so, I would pose, how do we grow our ministry? How do we attract people to our ministry? Well, we need to meet needs. And I think that the church, again, broadly speaking, some churches, I used to work with the Salvation Army, and I mean, they are amazing at meeting needs. They literally, their logo is doing the most good, their slogan, and they really meet a lot of needs. That's all they do. So I'm not saying that this is the case with all churches, but what I find is that with a lot of smaller churches that have a difficult time growing, they're focused on the spiritual needs and they're not meeting the actual earthly needs of their congregation. And what I see in Acts is that people were coming into the church and they were selling their possessions occasionally and giving the money to the apostles. And the apostles were making sure that no one in their midst, no one in the church had need. Well, in our churches today, there's tons of need. And the church, the inside of the church should look something like the Garden of Eden. It should look something, not that we can have heaven on earth, but it should look something like heaven on earth. That's the purpose, is to restore relationships and to restore relationships with each other and relationships with Christ. Those are emotional needs. Well, in the Acts church, we see that they're actually providing material needs. So people are not hungry. People are not thirsty. Presumably they weren't homeless, like they had their needs met. Well, that looks a lot like a Garden of Eden or a heaven sort of situation. Well, people would be super motivated to go to a ministry where their needs were actually met. And Anyway, so I digress. But if we were to meet needs during the year and then have events where we communicate that we're here to meet your needs and give you the life that God has for you and transition it into the spiritual life. Why do we want to help you have the best life? Because Christ has the best life, the best spiritual life, and he wants to know you. Why do we want to have healthy and whole relationships in our ministry? Because we want shifting it to the spiritual, because God wants to have a healthy and a whole relationship with you. And so this, I think, is a very powerful mode of using events and bringing people in to the church, but actually keeping them over the long run. Just like the people in Syria went out and they walked themselves across a whole desert to get their audience and bring them back to Jesus. Well, we can do that too. Our audience will go get people as soon as we start meeting their needs in a powerful way. Now, I think moving on from this, a question that I have had is, well, is this really true? Is this really what's happening in the church? And again, I'm not in the East, I'm not in China and in, all these countries over there. So I have to make sure I'm communicating in the West. Is this really what's happening? Has the church become less effective at meeting needs? That is my individual, having been to a lot of denominations, a lot of churches. I've spoken at churches. I've taught at different churches. I've taught at discipleship schools. I obviously work with pastors all over the place with Clickmill. It is my experience that churches are not meeting needs. But is that really the case beyond my experience? I want to know that it's not just bias. Well, during COVID, something very interesting happened in the United States, Kate, and the church was deemed non-essential. And that is technically illegal. You can't close down the church. And I was listening to pastors and I was having Zoom calls and I heard all the arguments for why the church really is essential. And, because we have the freedom of speech. This is illegal. They can't close down. We have the freedom of assembly. So you can't close us down. Or the spiritual needs are the most valuable and most important needs that people have. And this is absolutely essential.
This is a fundamental, basic thing that can be taken away from people.
Yes. Yeah.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. And all of those things I agree with. In the United States, it is against the freedom of assembly. It was illegal to do that, in my opinion. And that's not where we're going to land. But I'm just going to say, firstly, I'm with ministry leaders. It should not be taken away that people can go to the religious service of their choice. And I also believe that the spiritual need is the greatest need. That's why Christ came. He didn't die for our need for food. He died for our need for a relationship with God so we can have eternal life and relationship with him. So I agree with all of their arguments, but the problem is we have overlooked what the word, oh my goodness, what did I just say? Yeah, essential. And I've actually pulled this up here. There we go. Yep. So we've overlooked what the word essential actually means. And I just have a definition of the word essential pulled up, and it is a thing that is absolutely necessary. The water plants were not shut down during COVID. Nobody shut down the water facilities. No one shut down the food making factories. People still need food. They still need water because they're essential. And the thing that we were getting wrapped up in is, well, the spiritual needs are essential. We have a right? We have a right to assemble. We have a right to speak, but we forgot what the word essential actually means. Now, I was talking to ministry leaders during COVID, and they were working in addiction rehabilitation centers like alcohol addiction and drug addiction rehabilitation centers. They housed the homeless. And you know who didn't get shut down? They didn't get shut down. They are an overtly Christian ministry, and they're keeping homeless people off the streets. They're keeping people with addictions to hard drugs and alcohol off the streets. They're feeding the homeless. The government did not come in and say you're non-essential, because they're actually essential. You cannot have these people wandering the streets. Crime will go up. The community around these ministries would be, they would say no, they are essential because they help to keep us safe. They help these people that are in deep need of services, and you're not going to close them down. The population themselves would say to the government, no, they're essential. Why? Because they actually meet the definition of essential. They're absolutely necessary. Because when these people stop feeding the homeless, then you've got hungry homeless people everywhere. Who's going to do that? The people in that area, they're not just going to come together and do it. The government doesn't want to do it. So you can't close them down because they're actually essential by definition. Well, what happens is when the church is deemed non-essential, that's one thing. That's just a word. They can deem us non-essential legally. They can deem us non-essential, in whatever way they want. But if they can actually close down the churches and nothing happens, there's no pushback from the community, right? Let's even just secular, right? People who are not Christians. If the people who are not Christians do not say, no, open those churches, they're absolutely essential, we're not essential, just by the definition of the word. And that's what happened. All of the churches closed down, and a large number of them were not essential, and nothing happened because they don't actually meet any absolutely necessary needs of the people in their community. And my recommendation for ministry leaders that I talk to is that whether or not, if some pandemic or some crazy, crisis or something happens again, if it does, and you don't have an absolutely necessary, right, a way to meet needs that's absolutely necessary, they're going to close you down again. It's already obvious that they can do it. And so it's no longer good enough to depend on our, and I know different countries have different rights and things, but it's like, at least in the US, our right to free speech or our right to assembly, or the fact that a long time ago, people actually believed that the spiritual need was the most profound need. They don't believe that anymore. You either meet an absolutely necessary belief, or there is likely a time limit on your ministry in some capacity. So in regard to,
that's
yes,
really big problem where that's the big problem where exactly these spiritual needs, these fundamental needs that we have, are no longer important for people.
Yeah.
And that's a really big problem. And yeah, we need to do something to change this, to shift this perspective.
And how do we share with them that the spirit, because I agree with ministry leaders, the most important need is the spiritual need. It's the relationship with God. But the world doesn't know that. That's why they're worldly. That's why they're not Christian. They don't know that's their need.
Or they maybe know it, but have forgotten about it.
Yeah. And the way that we get their attention is by meeting the needs they know they have, not the needs we know they have. So what's Jesus do? He meets the earthly terrestrial need for food, for water, right? Homeless, right? I'm extrapolating this out into modern day homelessness, addicts, alcohol addicts, drug addicts, whatever it is in the community that is just absolutely essential. It's crippling the community. That's the need that Jesus went and met. And medical, we might say Jesus met a lot of medical issues, right? Blindness, lame. Well, okay, how about medical needs? If the church begins to do those things and people begin to realize, oh, wow, the church really has my best interest at heart, they really care about me, And then they say, well, we're only doing this because there's an even greater need that we believe that God wants to meet. Well, what's that? Now you've got an opportunity to share the gospel. People are interested in listening after we meet needs and not before. And I think that's also what we see in the New Testament. So,
And churches maybe need to get more involved in such initiatives.
Yeah. And I think that the church used to be very involved in this. And I think over time, it's just been less emphasized. And, the word essential means absolutely necessary. If you can be closed down and nothing happens in reality, and nothing happens, well, then you're not absolutely necessary. And the way we become necessary is by meeting needs, and that's what Jesus did. So coming around here, full circle back to events. I think a great strategy to marry events with how Jesus grew his following in the New Testament based on those 5 steps we looked at is in some way to communicate over the holiday season that your ministry is going to be focusing back in on meeting essential needs in the congregation. And to do that, it's really critical that ministry leaders understand who their congregation is and what the needs are. And maybe that's something that is already known, or maybe that's something that, if you're watching this and you're not in this call, maybe that's something you're not quite aware of. And we have a lot of resources, a lot of different worksheets and different things to help make that easier. In marketing, that's just called a target audience. Who is your audience? Are they inner city single working moms? Are they affluent, Silicon Valley technology executives? Like, different people have different needs, and you cannot meet them until you know who you're talking to. And so this is called a target audience, And so you need to identify who these people are. And over the holiday season, if you're capable during these events of saying, this is our initiative this year, is we're going to start focusing internally. We're going to start focusing on the needs of the people in our congregation and working with you to bless your life and to help you have the life God wants you to have. You want a better relationship with your wife, if that's a problem in your community, we're going to bring in, Christian Christian marriage and family therapists who are going to come in and help you with communication skills and help you to discover godly ways to resolve problems and to raise your kids and how to address problems that are coming up. If you want a better job, maybe you're in an area that is impoverished and there's a lot of poverty. We're going to bring people in who are going to help you develop job skills. We're going to give you jobs here in the church where you can intern and disciple, and we will be your references. If you know how to do this skill, audio, video, web design, whatever it is, we will be your references and we will help you to get higher paying jobs so you can have that time with your family, so you can be here at church, so you aren't just broke all the time. And these are the types of needs that if the church committed to over the holiday season, and then they actually did over the year, I think that ministries would see a large amount of growth. And the ministries I have worked with, and I've written about this in our blog, and I have talked about this in any number of our YouTube videos, the ministries that have done this and followed this, this meeting needs process have seen growth. And so that would be the recommendation on how to marry the events with the meeting of needs. And I think that furthermore, the ideal is that ministry leaders don't feel compelled to have huge events. They actually just meet needs consistently throughout the year. And people know they meet needs, and people flock to them just like they flock to Jesus. Now, can you still have events? Obviously, that's the case. We're still going to celebrate Christmas, but it's not mission critical to have the best event to get enough donations to fund the church or something like that. You just have people showing up consistently, giving and participating in the ministry like we would see in the book of Acts. And the book of Acts church is meeting needs. And this brings us around to, I think, about the final portion of this. And this is really tricky because for example, we've worked with one multi-site church here in the US. And I know there's over 30 pastors in this church, and I know quite a few of them. And I've had conversations, and some of them have said, how am I supposed to grow my satellite campus when I'm called in for 4 months out of the year to set up for events at the main campus and plan events? And so they have a huge Christmas event. They have a huge, this is in the US, so a huge Thanksgiving event. They've got big Easter events, and it takes weeks and weeks to plan for each one of these. And so they're explaining to me they're held accountable to grow their satellite campuses, their churches that they're responsible for. And they see growth as they have time and energy to pour into their, particular flock. But then 4 months out of the year, they're pulled out of their churches and are doing these huge events, light shows and all the rest for the central campus. And two things are happening in this ministry. Number one, the central campus is not growing. They're declining year over year. So it's very evident that the events aren't working, which is kind of what we're talking about in this call. But furthermore, because the pastors aren't able or even allowed to be in their ministries year round, they can't grow their ministries because they can't be there to meet needs. And so this is a very dysfunctional event system, I think, that we have going. And I think the question, and I'm going to share my screen for this part, and because I have something pulled up here. Give me 1 second. There we go. Okay. Let me see here. Share. All right. And I'm going to share this. There we go. Okay. And Kate, let me know when you can see my screen here.
Yeah, I see everything. That's
okay.
Perfect. Yeah.
So in the Christian church, or I would say the Protestant church, this is pretty common. We have what we would call the door and what we have called the core. And there's all this, chit-chatting online, especially in church marketing circles of, well, how do we get a bigger front door? Meaning, how do we get more people in? And you'll notice right there with the question, what we're not doing is we're not going to our audience. We're waiting at the front door for them to come to us. So even the concept itself doesn't make sense. However, how do we get them from the door to the core? How do we, make our front door bigger than our back door? Meaning people are leaving as fast as we're bringing them in. They're leaving faster than we're bringing them in. So we bring them in the front door and then they leave through the back door because something inside the church is not what they had anticipated. And so we've got all of this talk about the door and the core and the front door and the back door. And this is how we allocate resources in the church. And resources is time, energy, finances or money, the attention, the decisions of the leadership, even the volunteers which might be human resources, volunteers. Where are we putting all the resources? And what we're doing is we're putting them at the door. And again, this is in the West primarily. I can't speak too much further out from this, but Kate, you can tell me if this is the case in Bulgaria. But what do? We get all of our volunteers and we say, hey, we want you to stand by the front door and we want you to wave and greet and be super happy and make people feel welcome And what do? We take our finances and we buy donuts and we buy coffee and we get extra super fluffy chairs. We take we take a large portion, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we take a large portion of the tithes and the offerings, and we go and we just, we give it to homeless people that are not even in our church, or we go and we do missions trips to countries that are not in our church. And so what do? We take our resources and we give them to the people that are loosely or not affiliated with our ministry, in hopes that by blessing them, is the way I think we would say it, if I'm being fair, by blessing them, it will convince them that they should and would want to come to our church or ministry. And what we might call those people are the masses. And in Jesus' ministry, we also see the masses. So what we do in the church most commonly today is we take the resources from our tithing audience and we say, okay, you guys give us your tithes and offerings so we can take it away from you and go give it to these people over here. The people at the front door that we don't know that well and we're trying to convince to stay. The masses outside the church, we're going to take it from you and we're going to move it over here. And the question I would ask is that biblical? And if we come back over here and we look at Jesus' ministry and we say, where did Jesus put his resources? Well, did Jesus communicate with the masses? Yes. And then there are scriptures that say, and then he tried to run away from them and go hide up on the mountain and pray because he was exhausted. Now I'm obviously embellishing that a little bit, but Jesus spends time with the masses and he blesses the masses and he speaks to them, and gives them the Beatitudes. And then he leaves and he says, go and sin no more. He tells them to go home. Well, who does he spend the most of his time and energy and finances and attention and decisions? Where does he put the majority of this? He puts it with the most committed group, the people who left everything to follow him. He lives with the 12. The financial resources from the backers of Christ's ministry, and there's some evidence in scripture to talk about who that might be, but it's funding the 12. It's not being sent out in large part to the masses. It's being used to feed and house and do whatever it is that the 12 are doing. And where does Jesus put his time and energy? Into teaching and training and discipling the 12. And beyond that, who does he spend time with? Well, the 72. He spends some amount of time with the 72 disciples. And he spends the least amount of time and energy on the masses. He doesn't live with them. He doesn't eat dinner with them, at least not frequently. And flipping it around, coming even further, he has the 3. He has Peter, James, and John. And I was also just reading here in Luke where it says that he went up on, I'm probably not going to turn to it because I'm not exactly there, the Transfiguration. He took Peter, John, and James with him. This is super, super coincidental. I have all these pulled up. He took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto the mountain to pray. And he was praying, and there appeared of his the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became bright as a flash of lightning. And then 2 men, Moses and Elijah. He's up on the mount, and he's got 3 guys with him. And they had a few events like this where Peter, James, and John got to experience something that not even the other 12 got to experience. And so he gave the 3 of them even more resources and training and discipleship than the 12. Okay, well, why? Because he's going to give them the greatest amount of responsibility. What does he say to Peter? You are going to be the rock on which I build my church, something to that effect. You are the rock. And how, I don't just give away a responsibility here at Clickmill willy-nilly to anybody that comes in the door. Like, Kate, you and I and Sophie here, we've had a little bit of time together, an hour and a half. I'm not going to give you web design. You are not equipped for that, as far as I know. Well, the same thing. Jesus isn't going to give the future of the church. He's not just going to make one of the 72, or definitely not one of the masses, the rock of the church. That's not going to work. He's got to make the rock of the church and the core leaders, the 12. He's got to make those the people that he trusts the most, that have invested the most. And so where does he invest the most? In the core of the ministry. Well, in the West, what we do, as we've seen, is we don't invest the most in the core. Let me flip this around. We invest the most at the door, to the least committed. So what happens, and this creates an unhealthy environment inside the church, because where do we give all of the resources? To the people who are the least committed to our ministry. And then we say, oh, we've got all of our volunteers out there smiling and greeting, and they come in and they sign in at the connection booth, and they're getting to know people. And we say, oh my gosh, oh, this is your second week. We are so glad you're here. You should volunteer. And what do? We bring them into the ministry and we ask them to volunteer, and they go, okay, wow, I really feel cared for. And we take them from one of the masses and we make them, say, one of the 72. And how many resources do they get as soon as they start volunteering? Almost zero. There's no more training. It's just like, hey, stand at this door and greet, so that we can go get other people. And then the ministry's focus switches back to the people at the door. And the volunteers are happy for some amount of time. And in many churches, there is an issue that ministry leaders call volunteer burnout and pastor burnout. Why do we get exhausted and burnout? Because we feel unappreciated. We don't feel our needs are being met. They were being met a whole bunch. And then as soon as we committed, all of those resources that were focused on us go back to the people at the front door. And then what happens? The back door gets really, really big and people start leaving. Volunteers stop being consistent. All of the responsibilities that those volunteers that we were relying on fall back on the pastors. And now the pastors have too much to do because they also don't get enough resources. And so the pastors get burnt out. And there's this huge issue. We've got articles about this on Clickmill, the huge issue of volunteer and pastor burnout in the church, because we're misallocating the resources. And so when we send all of our resources to the door, to the masses, as maybe we would call them in Jesus ministry, we're giving the resources to people who are not committed to the ministry. And what we're communicating is, if you commit to our ministry, we're going to give you less stuff. Well, why would I ever do that? If, let's just say, as a Christian business person, as a person with a marketplace ministry where I teach ministry leaders how to reach their audiences more effectively and bring more people into the kingdom. If I said, I'm going to give you our highest end services for free, and when you commit to Clickmill, I'm going to give you less, I'd never sell anything, because they just got the best of it for free. What we need to do instead over the holiday season is to commit to meeting needs, and to meet more and more needs, the more and more people commit to our ministry, and flip this back around and make it look like how Jesus did. And this ends up with a much more biblical version of discipleship, where we're spending time with the people who are most committed to our ministries and we're building them up. And what does this do? The people in the middle, just like the people Jesus is healing, just like the disciples, their lives are forever changed. And they go out across the desert and they grab their friends and they're like, you won't believe this. You've got to come over here. And the people at the door, are they still blessed? Yeah, sure. Jesus feeds the 4,000. He feeds the 5,000. Like, sure, we'll do lunch once in a while. Or we do Sunday sermons, whatever it is. And we're going to bless them. But the needs are met in a profound way, closer and closer to the core of the ministry. And so when people are engaged at the door, the masses who are around the ministry, they're looking in and they're going, oh my gosh, I want what they have in there. And then they begin to commit, because we have properly incentivized the ministry to reward those who commit more. Well, why? Because the more that they get their physical needs met, the more they are going to be able to see the spiritual need. And again, this is the case in Jesus' ministry. When he's talking to the masses, he will he will use parables to speak to them. And then he'll come back to the 12 later and say, I'm going to give you a greater level of understanding because you've committed more, you've learned more, you understand my teachings more. So let me explain the parable to you, not to them, to you. I gave them what they can handle. I'm going to give you what you can handle. So the more they commit to your ministry, the more you commit resources to them, which incentivizes them to come to the core of your ministry. Why? Well, because the more they commit to your ministry and the more they're around you, the more they're going to be able to understand the more important need, which is the spiritual need. So this is a model of using resources, I believe, in a biblical way in our ministries. And if we structure our services and the ways in which we meet needs around this, and we communicate this over the holiday season, over the Christmas season, and we say, this year, we're meeting your needs, and we are going to figure out what those needs are, here, giving surveys and saying, listen, what is the biggest problem that you have in your life right now? Because this year we're going to be committed to solving the largest problems in our church right here. What's the biggest need you have in your life? Because we are going to be focused on meeting the biggest needs right here. And you might even ask, like, what is the most impactful experience you've ever had with a ministry? Or why don't you attend church more often? What are your 3 biggest issues with churches? And get this information, go through and compile it. And your audience, the people showing up in Christmas, will tell you why they don't come to church, what they want out of church. They'll tell you their biggest problems. They'll tell you their biggest needs. And you go through that and you start pruning off ministries that are not creating results. And you start building ministries that address the actual needs of people in your community. And through a process of trial and error there, you will discover where God, where God guides, he provides. You will discover where God's provision is and where he is guiding your ministry to go. And in my own marketplace ministry here at Clickmill, this sort of idea here has been profoundly impactful. When I started thinking this through about this is what we would call resource allocation. This is a fairly common way to discuss management or investing. And that's what we're doing in the church and in Christian ministry. We're investing in the kingdom of God. Well, we still have the same resources that everybody else in the world has. We have time and energy and finances and attention and decisions, physical buildings. Like we still have the same things to allocate. Well, as I started thinking about this, I started to realize here at Clickmill, well, who is the masses for my ministry here at Clickmill? Well, the masses are the people out on the blog. They're the people out on YouTube. Those are the masses. And do I want to bless them? Absolutely. I want to bless them. I want to, like this teaching will be on YouTube. Okay, well, am I going to spend all my time, which is what I used to do? I went to 4 years of Bible college. I was a youth pastor for 3 years. But I'm spending all of my time making content and writing blogs for the masses. Okay, well, that's where I should be putting the least amount of my resources. Okay, so who are my 72? Who are my 12? Who are my 3? Okay, well, the 72, Kate, are people like yourself who come to calls like this. And who are the 12? Well, the 12 are our clients. Our clients commit a lot of resources to us, and we commit a lot of resources to them, to making sure that their ministries are fruitful in their digital, their marketing efforts. But who are the 3? And this was what really changed Clickmill in a powerful way. Who are the 3? And I realized, to my surprise, that the most committed group of people to Clickmill are our interns. And I started an internship program about 2 years ago, and we've had, about a dozen different interns that I've worked with. and they're extraordinarily committed to Clickmill. And what I discovered is that the more I commit to the interns, the more powerful and the more exponential the
And
growth is.
inflation maybe becomes Clickmill.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Maybe more influential also becomes Clickmill.
Yes, well, you're absolutely right. And
More powerful, more influential, reaches a wider audience and
yeah, well, and
achieves greater results.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And
because it's from the core, the from the inside to the
yeah,
outside.
you're right. You're
And
exactly
by
correct.
the way, the question about how is here, well, here is like everything has freezed.
Yeah.
There are almost no efforts, not from the inside nor from the outside. It's just very very strange
Yeah.
place to be.
No,
Yeah.
yeah, and I completely understand. It sounds like maybe there's a very um like it's there's what would you say? There'd probably be a pretty big difference between like an active Christian and someone who's more like traditionally Christian or traditionally Catholic. Well, my family's Catholic, so I'm Catholic. That person's probably not going to be engaging in a super powerful way. So, yeah, to that end, these ideas that we study and we develop here at Clickmill, and I wouldn't say we develop, we rediscover them and based in scripture. Well, we test them as well. And when I started testing this idea of investing the resources, the most resources to the people at the core, the growth was just crazy. And it still is. We started about a year and a half, 2 years ago we had 3 clicks a day coming into the Clickmill website. And as I spent time every day and trained, sometimes training 8 hours a day with volunteers, with interns, over the year and a half to 2 years, we've got almost 1,000 hits a day to our website, about coming up on 30,000 a month right now, which is why, Kate, you're here, and why we had
Okay.
hundreds of other people sign up. And, over the last few of these calls, working on building that out and getting those email systems fixed. It's driving me crazy. But nonetheless, as I have invested in the the interns, they have been able to go out and fulfill the vision here at Clickmill. And the vision here at Clickmill is the Christian church is not doing well. We're shrinking. The culture is shifting away from the church, at least in the West. And there are countries where that's not true. Nigeria, I don't think that's true. The Philippines, I don't think that's true. There are countries where the church is exploding, and there are churches where it's on the decline, and it's on decline.
Yeah, like the example with Malta
Yeah, there you go.
or most of South Europe, but
Yeah,
most of it is just shrinking a lot.
right. And so the question is then, well, how do we change that? Well, at Clickmill, we want to teach and train strategies and ways of thinking that are different, because if we continue to do the same things, we're going to continue to see that decline. So we want to find more effective strategies. And what we have seen is that our interns not only bless Clickmill in a huge way by learning how to do all of this marketing. Well, we have to practice it. We have to do it internally. And so we're able to accomplish far more than I could ever do by myself. And furthermore, they develop the skills as people who are passionate about growing the kingdom and reaching the lost, both online and off. And they then take those skills out to the world. And I think all of the people who have wanted jobs in digital marketing and church marketing that have interned with us have all moved into that successfully. I just heard from the last one yesterday. We have a couple that are in college and they're just continuing their college, which is great. But they're actually out marketing their churches, building Christian businesses, starting Christian businesses, It's really, really powerful. And so we have seen just an immense amount of growth here at Clickmill as a result of investing in the core of Clickmill, our interns, not the masses out on YouTube. And, even as I say this, there will be people on YouTube who will hear this and they'll say, wait a minute, hold on. He's giving a 2-hour training to me on YouTube. But if I go over to Clickmill and I commit in some way, there'll be even better training. There'll be even more. Absolutely. And that is how we will get more people coming into the core of Clickmill and growing this following, growing this, I don't know what you want to say, movement, I think sounds kind of corny, but I guess that's kind of what it is. And so, for example, one of our interns is Sophie, who's here in our call. Sophie's joining us from Scotland. I'm in Hawaii. And Sophie has, Sophie, do you have an estimate on the number of hours of experience that you have?
I'm not sure, but probably like a couple hundred.
A couple hundred is what a 20-hour-a-week intern gets. They get 500 at the end of 6 months. You're coming up on the end of 6 months and you've been doing 30 hours a week. So I'd say probably closer to like 700 or 800 hours of experience. And Sophie, after having been with us for 6 months, and one of the things that we offer our interns here, because I want them, whether or not they stay here at Clickmill, we've had interns stay for a year just because they want to keep learning, and that's totally fine. But Kate, we've had interns that stay for a year because they love the program so much and they just want to keep learning. We've had interns that, what am I saying? Okay, so my goal with the interns is to find the right people who want to reach the world for Christ. And I want to give them the tools and the best ways of thinking that I can possibly give them based on 15 to 20 years of studying this and practicing this and being in ministries and around ministries and marketing ministries and all, whatever all the things are I've done. And I want to give them the best possible tools. And so are they, volunteering? No, they're not volunteering. We call it an internship, but it's really just discipling. They're here and they are doing work and they are committing like a volunteer would at a church or in a ministry, except all of the resources or the majority of the resources that I have are being poured back into them. They're not coming in and being greeted, by some super cool greeter at the door, and then I say volunteer, and then nothing happens after that. I say, hey, come in here, an intern, and I give hours of my own time every week and homework, and we look over assignments, and if we're doing a great job, I will absolutely be a reference for jobs and help them get jobs and recommend them to jobs for people if they want to move into that world. If they, I'll recommend them for jobs to people in the industry that I know, because I know how good I am at what I do. And if I train them, then I know that they're good at it too, especially if they did a good job. And I'll help them get jobs. And when we've done that, we've had interns hired out to other ministries. And more than that, if our interns want to work at their local church, which is what we're training them to do, and they need a reference, we'll be the reference. We will track the hours, just like we were just talking about how many hours of experience Sophie has. We'll track the results. Oh, the church wants to rank number 1 on Google. Well, look, you already have articles from working here at Clickmill that rank number 1 for this company and this church and that church. And, oh, you want to do web design for a ministry? Well, look, like Sophie is about to potentially take on a web design project, and she's fully trained to do it. And so she's going to have a full web design in her portfolio. And if it's something she wants to do in the future, she will have the credentials necessary to do it. And she'll have the people behind her saying, yes, she is qualified for that position. And so we're getting people who are well-trained and capable of helping the church reach the lost, and we're getting them into the ministry positions they should be in. Now, that is very different than how a church typically does things, or a Christian ministry. My job is to build them and to make them as capable as they can possibly be by the time they leave the internship, or we might just say discipleship program.
It's like building even a bigger community which will commit to this mission.
Yes.
And will strengthen the purpose it has.
Yes, absolutely.
I actually found Clickmill through YouTube,
Oh, wow.
And I also found out about the internship.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and that's why I decided to participate in this training.
Excellent.
And I would really love to participate in the internship,
Oh,
hopefully.
well,
Yeah.
excellent. Well, I would love to set up a call with you where we can discuss that more. Sophie, can I ask you a question? Is that okay? Can I put you on the spot?
Yeah, of course.
How do you feel about the internship program? Do you feel like this is relatively similar to, I know obviously we do marketing and we discuss practical, this is more theory, but we do that too. How do you feel that this is similar to the internship program, and anything you want to share with Kate in regard to your experience in the internship program?
Sure. I would say what we're learning with Brett right now, Kate, is very similar to the internship program. Like Brett mentioned, that it's more than just an internship, that yeah, you do learn about digital marketing and things like that, and you're very well equipped to be able to go out and to continue into a career in that area. But there's so much more discipleship that gets put into, and mentorship as well throughout the internship. So it's a lot more than just digital marketing. It's a lot of discipleship and mentorship as well.
As far as I know from other interns that I have watched their reviews and everything, and now as I participate in this training, this is not only an internship. This is more like spiritual guidance, like more of uh, founding and following a greater purpose, being part of something really bigger than ourselves, something that is not just like you learn, you complete some tasks, then you just switch off and watch your series or whatever, and you just forget about it, or like in the end of the day you do your work and then you don't care about anything you have done, or what you have done maybe have generated some revenue, some sales or anything, but hasn't done anything really really purposefully. I mean, it's just most of the internships, most of the work in digital marketing in all areas of business is just like um, searching for revenue, searching for getting more clients and things like that. And this has never been my thing. I am already involved in a few voluntary projects, um, which are helping especially women
Mm.
who have been in bad situations, and we're trying to cheer them up, to help them. The Clickmill is focusing on exactly this, to helping people find their way when they don't know where are in their life, to find again their purpose, to really feel somehow fulfilled,
Yeah.
and not just to check something off the box. It's a tick. I have ticked this. This is my list for the day is complete. This is not what I think has a meaning.
Right.
When we work, when we learn, we just need to do something more. We need to contribute in some way that is something different than what everyone else is doing. And in the end of the day, there is just nothing left except some revenue, some sales,
Yeah.
some people
Oh,
who praise our brand, and it's not about this.
yeah.
That's why I really love your agency, and I really started learning a lot about your work, and yeah, I'm really amazed
Well, excellent. Well, thank you
about
very
by
much.
the approach you have shown towards everything,
Well, thank
towards the business, towards the explaining how things are working through the biblical way, to not just raw business and data and numbers and yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And, that means a lot. Once we wrap up this call, we'll schedule a meeting where we can talk more and see if sounds like you would probably be a great fit for the program. We'll see if that's the case. And we
That will be
do.
amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The main thing we're looking for, obviously, is just people who have a heart to do ministry and reach people more effectively. And that's what we focus on. And is there a lot of checklists and tasks and practice, writing articles and reaching out to potential clients and building websites? And is there a lot of that stuff? Absolutely. But the purpose of that is not just to say, like many ministries do, volunteer and, sacrifice for the kingdom. Like, do I think we should sacrifice for the kingdom? Yes, absolutely. But that is, in my opinion, a very self-centered way to do ministry. The purpose and the goal of interns here learning to do these advanced digital marketing tasks and learning like what we're talking about, the underlying way of thinking about all these things, is so that you are as equipped as you can possibly be after the internship to go back out into the world and to not only have a better life in the sense that maybe you can, like many of our interns want to move into marketing for ministries and churches and Christian businesses. You have the skill set to do it, but you also have the skill set to get results, and to build websites and to create ministries that create a difference, not only here, but, in the kingdom. So that's absolutely the goal. And I'd love to talk to you more about that. To kind of wrap up this training, for anybody else watching online, this is a fun and surprising turn of events, but the internship program was not something I was intending really to talk about super in depth, except to show that as you put resources into the core of your ministry, things grow. And I think that's evident from the conversation that we've seen here. Now,
It's like everything. You need to build things from within. You need to heal things from within,
yes,
so they can flourish from the outside and
yes,
within also, and to become even better. Yeah,
yes,
it's like
love
with
that.
everything. It's not only in the ministry.
That's
It's
right.
everything.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
all areas of life. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, to that end, and kind of bringing the training to a conclusion, and this is separate from our internship program. So if you're interested in the internship program, please head on over to Clickmill and book a call with me. But like I said, that's not really what I was intending to focus on, though that is awesome and amazing. Are you able to see my screen okay?
Yeah, everything's okay.
Excellent. So if you are interested in the internship program, you're welcome to come over to clickmill.co and look at the internships. We have started a brand new training program that is intended to be accessible for ministry leaders or aspiring ministry leaders anywhere in the world. And what I have done is I have spent years now consulting and training and doing digital marketing for some of the world's largest ministries. And they're paying $150 an hour to hear the same things that we're talking about right now, and then implementing some of these things into their ministries. And one of the things I have felt led to do in the last 6 months or so is to try to make this sort of training available for anybody that wants to get into ministry. And so what we've done is we've created a weekly church growth training. Interns get to join for free, by the way, if that's something that we come to, Kate. But either way, if you're looking for weekly training, it is extraordinarily affordable. You get access to live trainings every single week, just like this. They are only 1 hour. You get access to all of the trainings we've done in the past, without exception. You get two ebooks that come along with this. And we are also going to be starting a ministry growth community through WhatsApp, which seems to be the best way for people internationally to be discussing the issues that they're facing in their ministries, and that we can all focus in on creating fruit in the ministry together. And then, of course, you get your first month free. So if that's something that's interesting to you and you've loved this training, please come over to clickmill.co. You can book a call with me if you have questions, but you can also just click subscribe. And as soon as we see that subscription come through, we're going to add you to our weekly meeting through Google. What is this? Google Calendar. We're going to add you to the weekly meeting, add you to the emails to make sure that you have access to the back end where you can see all the other trainings and get your ebook and everything like that, ebooks. So with that, that brings us very near the end here. We've just got a couple minutes left. Kate or Sophie, do either of you have any thoughts or questions or anything else before we conclude our call for the day?
Well, I think this training comes at a very appropriate time, just now that Christmas is coming, and really we need to be reminded how to approach people, how to reach people, so they can get closer to Christ Church, to that greater purpose that actually this time of the year serves. It's not about the presents, the lights, the fancy whatever, chocolate Santa or whatever.
Of course,
You know
you're
what I
exactly
mean?
right.
It's all about the real meaning, the real purpose of this time of the year, and churches really need to do a lot of work to be able to reach people, to reach their hearts, to reach their minds, to shift their perspective somehow.
It's great.
A little bit, at least, on this topic.
Thank you. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you for being here. I'm going to end the recording, and we can schedule something, Kate. But for everyone watching online, thank you so much. If you've stayed to the end of the 2-hour video, I know this is a long training. I hope it's blessed you. And I look forward to connecting with you if you book a call or subscribe to our weekly trainings. God bless and Merry Christmas.